Hi everybody, it's Geordie from Geordie's Cards. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am creating this fun little slider pop-up card using a combination of Heffy Doodle products and MFT stamps. And I really like these little stamps. Haven't used them before, so I was happy to get them out. So the supplies I used are the Hangin' with My Gnomies stamp set from MFT. And I just used the little girl and the little house and a few of the accessories. I used the Highlander stencil from Heffy Doodle, which I really wanted to try out, and these slider pop-up dies from Heffy Doodle. So to start with, I took a piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock, and this was just a scrap piece that I had in my stash, so I'm not 100% sure of the size, but it's definitely bigger than 5.5 by 4.25. And I'm just layering my stencil over that. I've used a little bit of removable adhesive to attach the piece of cardstock down to my Make Art station. And I'm using the Speckled Egg Distress Oxide ink and going in with a blender brush, and I'm just going to blend that through the stencil onto my cardstock. And I'm going fairly heavy-handed just to create a nice kind of pattern on my card. And I did have ideas initially about putting another color in here. I was going to try and do something fancy with the stencil, but in the end I just decided to keep it kind of plain because I really liked how it turned out, and also I knew that my images were kind of going to be quite busy, so I didn't want too much going on in the background, and I thought this kind of nice subtle kind of duck egg blue just worked really nicely in the background without too much else going on. So I just stuck with the one color in the end. So I'm just continuing until I've covered the whole area, and then lift up my stencil, and there you go. So off camera, I went ahead and stamped out my images, and as I've said, I've used the little girl gnome, the little house, and then a few of the kind of accessories, the flowers and the mushrooms, and a couple of the little critters. So I decided to do the roof of my house in red, kind of like a toadstool house, I guess. So I'm using R59, R27, R24 and R22. I was a bit nervous about colouring this in because it is a rather large area, and I'm I'm definitely not the best colourer in the world. So I was a little bit unsure about how to place my shadows. In the end, I'm not really sure that I've done it a huge amount of justice, but I certainly did the best that I could, and I think it turned out kind of cute anyway. I will say that I have only shown one coat on camera because the colouring took a long time, and there's already a lot of colouring in this video. So I did go back and I think I did actually 3 coats on this roof of the house because it was such a big area, and I was really trying to blend my markers out and get a nice smooth blend. I went back several times to try and achieve that. I've only shown one because it would just take too long. So I've just gone in, as always, with my darkest marker, then blending out with my R27, going in with my R24, and then finishing off with my R22. And this is the kind of area where I wasn't sure about the shading. I didn't know whether to bring the kind of shading all the way along the bottom of the house, and perhaps I should have done that. I kind of kept it all off to the right-hand side, and I think it was okay. I do find the red markers bleed anyway, but I did have a few areas where they bled outside of the lines. So I've used my 0 marker to kind of clean that up a little bit, and I will go in with a white Jelly Roll pen later on to clear those lines up. So for my door, I'm using E47, E44 and E43. And again, I did go back in a few times to kind of smooth this out, but I have only shown one layer on camera. As I say, there's a lot of colouring in this video today. These little stamps are quite detailed, and there's lots and lots of little bits and pieces to colour in them. So it does take quite a long time, but I really enjoyed sitting down and colouring. I haven't done a great deal of that lately, so it was kind of fun to just sit down and relax and do some colouring. So for the little stonework, I pulled out my W markers and I ended up just using W7, W5 and W3, I think. I will check that and I'll write the markers down for you. But I'm pretty sure it was W7, W5 and W3. I pulled out W1 and W0 and didn't use them. So it was kind of the darker markers. I wanted them to look a bit more like stone. So I just did the bits around the door. I did the kind of window frames and the frame around the window and the door, and then the stones around the outside of the house, including the kind of hearthstone as you walk into the door, not hearthstone, the kind of front stone at the front of the door. So that's what I did with my W markers, and I kind of liked how it turned out. It looks kind of sweet and looks like a nice little house. So just finishing off with that, just laying down, as always, my darkest marker first and then blending out to lightest. And I did think about kind of adding some texture in the form of dots to these, but I decided against it because I thought, as I said, it's quite busy anyway, and I just thought I'd leave it as it was. So just finishing up that little frame around the door as well, which I did with the same colours. For the little windows, I decided to do them in some Y markers. So I used Y13 and Y11. These are quite pale yellows, and I just wanted it to create a little bit of warmth. This isn't going to be a nighttime scene, but I just kind of thought it looked quite pretty and kind of added to that air of storybookness, if that's a word, that these little images kind of give off. They kind of have that vibe, don't they? So on to the main part of my house, I used YR02, YR00, and YR000. I really love these colours. They're very soft kind of oranges, and I wasn't sure, because obviously my roof is red, I wasn't sure about bringing oranges into the house, but in the end I really liked how it turned out and I thought it looked quite pretty. So again, just laying in some shadow and then blending out towards my lightest. I did, again, do this a couple of times, and I don't think I've kept that in the video because, as I said, it was just too long, but it did end up kind of smoothing out and being nicely blended in the end, which I was happy with. And so I'm just filling in all the spaces now with my lightest marker, and as I say, after that I'll go back and do another coat. So after that, I took my red markers again, so exactly the same markers that I used on the house, R59, R27, R24 and R22, and I'm doing my little mushrooms, and I'm going to do them all exactly the same. And you could definitely play around with the colours of these, and you could even add some spots and that sort of thing using either a jelly roll pen, white gel pen, or you could try using some different coloured markers. But I decided just to keep it quite simple and just go with the red caps on my little mushrooms, or toadstools, I guess they are. So that's what I decided to do. So I'm just doing that for all of them, and then just, as I say, colouring them all exactly the same. Nothing particularly fancy or clever about this. It's all fairly straightforward colouring. And like I say, I really enjoyed it. I haven't actually made too many cards with a lot of colouring in them recently. The last card I made was all die cuts, which is something I don't do very often. So it was nice to get back into some colouring and stamp out some images. And as I say, I've had the stamp set for a little while, but I haven't used it, and I have been dying to, because I really love the images in the stamp set, and so it was really nice to pull them out and have a play around. So once my little toadstools, well, the toadstool caps were done, it was time to do the kind of bases. So I decided just to go for a very neutral colour combination for that, and I used E41 and E40. I didn't want to pull in too many different colours, so I tried to keep the colour families the same. So I've used the E40s on the door, and I decided to use the E40s on the mushrooms. I just chose lighter E40s to do that. So once that was done, I took out my Jelly Roll pen and decided to try and clean up these kind of little areas around my mushroom house, or my little house that I had gone outside the lines in. So what I like to do is to use my Colourless Blender initially to try and push as much colour through the back of the paper. And I say push because that's what I do. I kind of dab the marker onto the spots where I've made the mistakes, and it kind of pushes the colour back out through the back of the paper, if that makes sense. And then I just like to clean it up a little bit with the white Jelly Roll to clean up any other little bits. So that's my little trick for getting rid of any mistakes. So for the centres of my flowers, I went back to those Y11 and Y13 markers, just to keep, as I say, I don't want to introduce too many colours to this card, so I wanted to try and use the same colours throughout and keep it nice and simple. So for my flowers, for the actual flower petals, I used BV34 and BV31. I had to check that. And I really love this colour combination. It's kind of a purplish colour, but it's quite soft. And yeah, I realised that I hadn't zoomed in, so I did manage to remember to do that while I finished off the flowers. And I did do all of these flowers, all of these bigger ones, exactly the same. Again, just because I didn't want to introduce too many colours. Initially, I thought about bringing in some pink, but I just thought that that would kind of clash quite a lot with the red roof of the house. And I kind of like the way this kind of purpley bluish colour looks. So I decided to just stick with the one colour for all of these little flowers. So what I did was I just laid my darkest marker in towards the centre of the flowers, blended out with the lighter one, and then went back with my darker one to finish off. And I did the rest off screen because I didn't think you needed to see me repeating the same thing over and over again. For my greens, I used YG09, YG07 and YG05. These are nice kind of yellowish greens, nice and bright. And I just kind of liked the way that these popped on my and amongst all these other little colours. So I used that for the grass around the house, and then also for the leaves and stems of these little flowers. So again, I'm using the darkest marker on the stem. The stem is very, very tiny. So I decided not to try and blend out lots of different colours. I just went for the one. And then I'm kind of layering the darkest marker on the bottom of the leaf and blending out towards lightest towards the top. And I did the rest off camera again, so you didn't have to watch me repeat the same thing over and over again. And I'm using exactly the same colours for the little leaves of the flowers that the little girl gnome is holding. Again, I just wanted to keep the colour palette fairly similar so that I wasn't introducing a whole heap of different colours all the time. So on to the little gnome's hat. And I'm using those same yellows, but I'm adding in the Y15, just to add a little bit more depth and dimension. I wanted to kind of create a little bit more shadow. So I introduced that darker marker just to do that. And I am using it quite sparingly, just towards the edges of the little hat. And then I'll blend out with my Y13 and finish off with my Y11. And again, I did this a few times just to make sure that the blend was nice and smooth. But I think adding in that extra darker marker just really helps to kind of create the kind of dimension that you want in a bigger image. So I filled in the center of the flowers with the two lightest markers again. And now I'm using those same BV markers, so BV31 and BV34, to kind of colour in the little girl's dress, or the little gnome's dress. And I was debating on doing like a yellow apron, but I decided that I had enough yellow in the card. So I decided to do the apron in white, which I will do in a bit once I've done the little flower box that she's holding. So I'm using the same E40 markers that I used on the door, so E47, E44 and E43, just to kind of make this look like a little bit of a wooden planter that she's holding. And then I think I go in to do the little apron, for which I used N0 and the Colourless Blender. So just using the the N0 marker very sparingly, just right around the edges of the apron, and then blending that out with the Colourless Blender. And there were a couple of little patches in between the flowers, which I decided to try and colour in that N0 marker as well, just to make it look kind of seamless, I suppose. So I was debating what to do with her hair, and while I just kind of debated that, I went on to her skin. So I used E11, E00 and E000 for her skin. There's only a tiny little bit showing actually, so I didn't really, probably even just 2 markers would have been enough, but I used all 3. And I did just go back in a couple of times to add that E11 to create a bit more shadow right around her face where the hair and the hat would be overhanging. Then it was onto her hair, and I decided to do this in E50 markers. So I used E50, 51, 53 and 55. And in the end, I did bring in E57 as well, because I decided that it wasn't quite enough contrast for my liking. And I did mess around with this for quite some time because I am not an expert at colouring hair. I think I've said this a few times. I'm not really an expert at colouring anything, but I like to try. And I just kind of wanted to create some looks of light and shade, particularly in her braids where, you know, you would have parts that were overlapping that would be darker and then bits that would be catching the light. So that's what I tried to do. I'm not sure that I achieved it, but I certainly gave it my best go. So like I said, I did go back and forth a few times with this and then decided to bring in the darker E57 just to create a little bit more contrast. And I kind of like the way it turned out. It's almost, I don't know what colour this is, like a dirty blonde, I suppose. I don't know. Don't know how to describe it, but I think it works for hair. I think it worked okay. So I did one side, and once I was happy with that, I went into the other side and just did exactly the same kind of method for that part. So on the braids, I kind of did darker towards the center of the braids and then on the underside of each little braided part, and then made it lighter towards the top, if that makes sense. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. And yeah, I like I say, I'm no expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I had a lot of fun trying and did my best to get it right. So this is where I bring the E57 in, and then I go through and blend it all out again with each colour. But I just liked the kind of depth and dimension that this darker marker brought in with it. And I thought it was lacking before. So this kind of fixed it, I think. So yeah, I just went ahead and blended out again with all of the previous colours that I'd used, just adding that darker marker in as well. And I am quite happy with how she turned out in the end. I think she turned out kind of cute. These images, to be quite honest, I think you'd be hard pressed to make them go horribly wrong because they are very cute anyway, and I don't think it would really matter how you coloured them. They would be really, really super cute coloured anyway. So yeah, but as I say, I really enjoyed just sitting down and spending some time colouring today because I haven't done any for a little while. We've had visitors or a visitor, so I've been quite occupied entertaining and taking our guest around and showing her the sights of Abu Dhabi, where I live. So I haven't had a huge amount of time to spend in my craft room. So it's been nice to kind of get back into it and do a little bit of crafting. So for the little flowers that she's holding, I decided to go back to my YR02, YR00 and YR000. So that, again, I'm not bringing in too many new colours, but I didn't want them to be the same kind of bluey purple that I'd used on the other flowers. So I just decided to use those colours instead. And then finally for my little worm, I'm using E57, E55, and then I did bring in a little bit of E53 as well, just to create a little bit more contrast. But yeah, he's just a kind of a little extra. So I'm just colouring him in, and then I did go back again and just add another little coat to kind of make those little segments of him stand out a little bit. And he's very cute as well. I didn't really know where I was going to put him on my card, but I just kind of thought it would be fun to colour him in. So that's what I did. And I should say that off camera, I did go ahead and colour in my little ladybird. And again, I just used the R markers that I already had out, which I'd used on the toadstools and the little roof of the house. So once all of my colouring was complete, it was time to bring my Jelly Roll pen in again. This is a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen. And I'm just adding some highlights all over the place. I don't really have any kind of system for adding these. I just kind of put them where I feel like it and hope for the best. It seems to work out okay most of the time. I do like to, on my little windows for my house, I do like to kind of add some kind of diagonal lines to make it look like shine marks that you would see in a window. I don't know if that makes sense and if you know what I'm talking about, but yeah, I know what I'm talking about, which is the main thing. So that's what I kind of like to do with windows and anything glass, actually, if I'm colouring in anything glass. Sunglasses, drinks, containers, things like that. I like to add that kind of diagonal shine mark. But to everything else, as I said, don't really have any particular rhyme or reason to where I put my white gel pen. I just kind of go with it and hope for the best. And most of the time it turns out absolutely fine. So just finishing up, adding some little details to my toadstools and then a little bit on my worm as well. Once all of my colouring is done, it is time to cut these out. I did fussy cut them because I don't have the coordinating dies. And off camera, I went ahead with that panel that I had created using the stencil and the Distress Oxide. I went ahead and cut out the pop-up slider. And it's got some score lines on it, which I folded. And then there's another piece that comes with the die to create this kind of backing piece, which I'm laying down now. And all you do is you pop a little bit of double-sided tape at the very bottom flap of the kind of top panel, and you attach that, the bit that I've done in white cardstock, you attach that just to that very bottom piece, and that's the mechanism that helps it slide up and down. And then you want to be careful when you're attaching your images that you don't glue them all the way over the card. So for example, for this little house, I want it to be sticking up when I pull it up. So I'm only using glue on the very bottom of that so that it can pop up when I slide it up. So I'm kind of just deciding where everything should go. Now my little girl gnome is going to be kind of front right as you're looking at the card. So I'm just popping her down, and she doesn't stick up a huge amount, but I did be careful just to make sure there wasn't any glue right at the very top of her hat so that it could slide up with the rest of the card. And now I'm just kind of fiddling around deciding where to put everything else. I kind of debated putting this flower behind the house, but I decided it was a bit big and I thought it would look better in the foreground instead. So I just made a little kind of arrangement of the two flowers and the little toadstool there at the front to the left-hand side to try and balance out that kind of front part of the card. And I like that there are these two little flowers are different sizes, so that you've got one that's slightly taller, one that's larger, because they do look quite nice grouped together. And then this little toadstool I just decided to pop in there to kind of bring the red down towards the bottom of the card as well. And I'm just, trying to decide where it should go. And I decided just to pop it off to the side there a little bit and try and tuck it behind one of those leaves. So it looks a little bit further back. So then I've got those bits down. It's time to try and figure out where my little ladybird, my little worm, and my other flowers are going to go. Initially, I thought about putting some images on the inside. So as you obviously slide this flap up, you're going to have a little kind of hidden part underneath where you can pop a message or another image. And initially, I thought about gluing some of these images down in those areas underneath, but I thought it might interfere with the mechanism a little bit. So I didn't want to do that. and I decided just to place everything around the outside, and all I'm going to have is a sentiment hidden underneath that little flap when you slide it up. So I'm just, like I say, just fiddling around, just deciding where everything's going to go, popping a little toadstool in behind my worm, and making sure I'm happy with everything. Off camera, I did go ahead and colour another little ladybird, which is just trying to balance out the kind of left-hand side to make sure it's the same as the right, I suppose. And I'm laying these little flowers in the corner, being careful, again, that they don't interfere with the mechanism too much, and making sure that I definitely don't get any glue on the mechanism or else it won't slide up and down. So being quite careful how I pop those down and just checking it from time to time to make sure it's still working. So just adhering this little ladybird, as I say, up into the top left-hand corner. And I have been using my Lawn Fawn glue tube to stick all of these parts down. Now these little ladybirds have some little trails that go with them, and I'm always nervous about stamping once my card base is created, and this one in particular did get a little bit kind of thick, but it's still okay, it works all right. So initially I had created a second stenciled panel using some cracked pistachio, and I was going to use it underneath, but I felt like it was too much, it was too samey. So I found this piece of pattern paper instead, which I believe comes from a Honeybees set. I will try and look it up and pop it in the description below what it's called. But I just kind of lined up where my sentiment was going to go and then stamped that down with some Versamark Onyx black ink. And there we go, that's kind of like the main part of the card done. I've got my little sentiment hidden underneath. So in this Slimline, it's the Heffy Doodle Slimline pull tab dies, there's this little arrow piece, and I thought it would work perfectly on this card, and it does. It fits exactly the same size. So I cut that from the same pattern paper that I've used in the kind of hidden part underneath, just to kind of tie everything in, and I decided just to leave the arrow part blank. Then I took some Lawn Fawn mermaid cardstock and stamped a little sentiment on the inside along with one of the little flowers. And now I'm using some Heffy foam tape strips to add to the back of my card, just literally around the three edges, so at the bottom and on the two sides. And I'm just using this so that it pops it up a little bit and makes it easier to take hold of that pull tab to slide the card up and down. And that is literally all I'm going to use to attach this to the card base. So I'm just going to remove the backing paper and then line it up onto my card base and make sure I've got my card around the right way, because I have done that before. I was stuck it on the wrong side or the wrong edge and been horrified. So making sure it's all working properly, and it does stick a little bit, but the more you pull it up and down, the more it works, and the easier it works. And there we go, card done. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. I just think it's so sweet. And these images are just adorable. I hope you enjoyed watching. Please do give me a comment. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to leave me a comment. I always try and reply. Do give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And please do subscribe to my channel. I'd love to see you back. Thank you so much. Bye.